we don't want to make this page look too cluttered. So we'll try and link off of the page to keep it as clean and easy to use as possible. So that's kind of the updates for us. If you want to go back to the agenda, Aisha, for the benefit of those who did not make last month's meeting, we did talk about what our deliverables would be, and everybody, well, almost everybody took away an assignment to do some research on over the last month. So as we go around, please introduce yourself and your area of interest and expertise for the benefit of the folks who didn't make last month's meeting. We'll start, we already have a little adjustment to the agenda in that Nick did reach out to California in order to ask about the status of their brand new program managing solar waste under the solar panels under the universal waste laws that they promulgated as a state. Unfortunately, we have not had any luck connecting with the right individual in California, so we're still waiting for that information and that feedback to occur. Another topic that we were responsible for, and although the agenda says I'm going to report out on it, Nick Nader is going to report out. So Nick, if you want to introduce yourself and your position with the department and give us a brief overview of what we found out from EPA about possibility of us handling solar panels as universal waste in New Jersey.
Yes, hi everyone. This is Nick Nader from New Jersey DEP, Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management. Okay, well, can I just go back to that other topic first, Karen, or?
Sure.
California? I just want to say that, well, our contact in the California Department of Recycling, well, basically he wouldn't respond to our repeated email requests for information. I did reach out to the California Department of Toxic Substances Control through their website. I mean, that's the department that administers the hazardous waste and universal waste programs in California. Now, so far, the only information they have sent me is a list of universal waste handlers that accept end-of-life solar panels there. So that's not much use. Now that Department of Recycling, Department of Toxic Substances Control, and the Public Utilities Commission in California, they were supposed to have published a joint white paper on this topic, the recycling of solar panels, earlier this year, but I guess it hasn't been finalized. And I can't get my hands on a draft copy so far. I was going to suggest maybe you or somebody higher up in our department, maybe they can directly reach out to the director of this Department of Toxic Substances Control. So
okay,
that was just now as far as the universal waste program in New Jersey, get my notes here. Now, in December of 2019, I believe it was, the Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey approached the department with a request to include the end-of-life solar panels in the state universal waste program. So then we reached out to the US EPA, and it was apparent that the US EPA is not really planning on doing this on a national level, but they did advise us that if we were interested to go ahead on the state level. Um, as you may know, I mean, individual states have the latitude to adopt additional waste streams into their individual universal waste program. So provided those waste streams meet a certain criteria. So if we were to take that route, then the next step would be to receive a petition, and then to start the rulemaking process, you know, which would include like a draft rules and then public comment period and so forth. Okay. So that would be probably a good idea to go with to go that route with the universal waste. But at this point, I think it would be kind of premature, because if we were to start that process right now, it would preempt the whole purpose of this commission, you know. So maybe we could include that as part of our final recommendations once this commission concludes its work. Is there anything else you would like me to talk about, Karen?
No, I think that's fine, but let's open the floor to anybody who may have questions or comments about this possible approach that New Jersey could take towards universal waste. Obviously, some of it will depend on Lyle's findings. Unfortunately, Lyle's not here today, but he said that although it's not a closed topic, it was his understanding that only a small percentage of solar panels contain hazardous constituents, that the earliest panels contain lead or lead and solder, but that was quickly phased out. And then there is the cadmium telluride panels, but apparently it was his understanding that they were only a small percentage of the market. But again, his takeaway research topic was to determine if those statements are accurate and to put some numbers towards those statements as small percentage and when lead was phased out, and if there were labeling requirements or labels that held up in order to track which panels are hazardous and which are not. So we'll have to wait till next month for his report out. But with that, I will open the floor to any questions or comments that folks may have for Nick or anybody.
Hey, Karen.
So let me ask about this category for universal waste that you are talking about. That is, then something has to be toxic enough that is dealt with that way. And so I guess what we're faced with is more to decide whether the encapsulation and or the amounts of cadmium or whatever else, lead, are small enough that they wouldn't have to be dealt with that way, or I mean, is that the threshold of what we're trying to ascertain?
I'm not sure that it's a percentage of those constituents in the panels, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that there's very few panels that contain any lead or any cadmium, that the percentage of panels is the issue that contains constituents, not the percentage of the constituents in the panel. Nick, am I right with that?
Yes, correct. Absolutely.
Hey,
I did think part of that also had to do with, you know, that even if there is lead, it's more in the frame, like in the solder or something, or in those pieces, whereas the panels themselves are glass with maybe some silicon or something.
Hey, Karen.
Yeah.
It's Chris. We went through a lot of this early on at PSE&G, even some of it before I started. But we find that the solder is integral into the membranes because it's all the electrical connections. It happens more on the older panels than the newer. So early on in the industry, a lot of the older panels that had higher percentages of cadmium and lead are the ones that will be coming out of service, it seems, sooner than later. And as time had gone on, the newer panels have some reported lesser toxicity. But there's a very prescribed method of proper destruction and testing to determine if something like this is hazardous versus non-hazardous. And we did some quasi testing. I wouldn't rely on it, but we did on the older panels, based on our testing, come up with hazardous levels of lead and cadmium in those panels. Not to say it met any criteria, but we just did it as an experiment in a sense. So I think, my question, I guess, on the universal waste side, I think it's likely we're going to lean that way, at least for a majority of the older panels that are there. And I think what we end up having to do is rely on the manufacturer's knowledge of what they would consider and have determined what would be hazardous versus non-hazardous. Because as you can imagine, they're going to have off-spec materials that they would likely have to have disposed of through their manufacturing process, and they would have had to make some determination. It's almost generator knowledge, and we relied on some of that in the past too. But we have at PSE&G, and I don't have an updated list, but we probably have a good 9 or 10 different types of panels. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh. I can't hear you now, but I was able to hear you.
I was
Looks like-
hearing.
Chris might be frozen.
Oh,
Nope.
He's moving now. Yeah, it looks like we're having connectivity issues with Chris.
This is David from Panasonic. May I interject something while we wait for Chris?
Sure.
Yeah. I listened to the recording from the meeting last, and I think one of the issues was the thin film cadmium telluride versus crystalline silicon panels. And from what I can determine, it looks like the thin film panels, which were, according to, I forget the gentleman's name, were not really installed in New Jersey, maybe some very early projects, but they're currently about 5 to 10% of the marketplace and are primarily used in utility grade installations. So my initial thought would be we would not see too many of those. Well, we shouldn't see any of them in the residential marketplace. I also have been interested in the toxicity issue, and I can only speak in general terms, but well, in Panasonic's case, we began to experiment with lead-free solder in 1995 in anticipation of lead becoming an issue in solder and the Ross requirements in Europe, which were, I think, really implemented may not be the right word, but at least conceptualized, 2003, 2004 timeframe, put in place and took effect in 2006. I can't say that, every particular product was made with lead-free solder, but, there was a major change in the electronics manufacturing processes circa 2006 in anticipation or in compliance with Ross. It's not to say that every panel, was made with lead-free solder, but there was a major change at that point in time from, leaded solder to lead-free solder. I also came across a study that was done by the International Energy Agency, something called their Photovoltaic Power System Program, where they worked with an EPA protocol, I think it was 1311, to try to determine, and I'm not sure how to say it, but the human health risks associated with solar panels, both in installation and in landfill, unlined landfills, and determine that using this EPA protocol that there would be less than 1 to 10 to the -6 chance of well, 1 order of magnitude beyond that cancer standard. So I would be happy to circulate that report. I don't know how helpful it'll be to this discussion, but it did seem like it provided a lot of very useful information on how panels would likely behave in an unlined landfill.
So Dave, just you made 3 really good points in there. I just want to make sure I have the details right. So when you said 5 to 10% of a certain kind of panel was used strictly in commercial installations, is that the cadmium telluride panels?
The cadmium telluride thin film.
Yes, okay. And you said that in 1995, Panasonic started experimenting with lead-free solder, and
Correct.
in 2006, there was a major change in processes. So is that to say that the experimenting went on essentially from 95 to 2006 with the elimination of lead in solder in 2006?
It was in preparation. Well, it's hard to go back in time and start in 1990 and assume you're in 1995 and predict that ROS is going to be implemented in 2006. I don't think we knew that in 1995, but we did understand that lead solder was becoming an environmental concern and began research. We were well prepared for the ROS changeover, and worked very hard to convert, almost all of our products to lead-free solder circa 2006 on a worldwide basis.
And are your panels labeled so one would know whether they're lead-free or not?
No, I don't believe so. All they would say on them is either Panasonic or Sanyo with a model number. I'd have to check on that. I don't believe they were labeled to say lead-free solder. It's unlikely.
Okay.
Hey, Karen, I apologize about my internet connection. It's one of the joys of working from home.
No problem.
But the last thing I wanted to say is that the timing of approaching the universal waste petition. I know it takes several months, if not probably more than a year to go about something like that. So I didn't know if it's something we wanted to even consider doing in concert with what we're doing now, because there's a lot of other issues, I guess, that come along with this, besides just petitioning both EPA for a designated universal waste category for the panels. So it's just a thought because of the timing associated with something like that. It looks like for at least some of the panels that are out there, I know a majority of ours are thin film, they're older. And we we have a number of arrays out there too, ground and roof mounted, that through our Solar for All programs, in addition to all our pole mounted panels. So, we still have some time before those larger arrays come out of service, right? But, and hopefully we don't get any major storm events that takes them out prematurely. But we do have a number that come out every month from the poles. And I could just give you an idea from the last look at that, just a number. So give or take, now these are just averages over the last couple of years. We have about 185 panels that come out every 45 days from, on average per year from storm events, and a majority of those are vehicle accidents. So.
And where you left off before you we lost you was you said that PSE&G has about 9 or 10 different brands of panels, types of panels?
Yeah, so different manufacturers, we don't, unfortunately, we didn't stick to one standard, and I don't know how that work was bid out and how the suppliers are made, but we do have, from what I see in our inventory, that's now dated a little bit by a couple of years, but there's like 8 or 9 different manufacturers listed for the different types of panels that we have out there. So, and all different ones. And some are different models through the same manufacturer as well.
And do you know with each of those 8, 9, 10 types of panels that PSE&G has deployed, which ones are older, which ones are thin film, which ones have lead solder, which ones don't have lead solder? Like, do you have an inventory? I think we lost him again. All right, maybe he'll come back to us.
Well, so as David was saying, I think and I've never seen any modules that have any kind of labeling about toxic components, and so they're clearly sealed and it's never been advertised what might be in it. So I don't think that in an inventory, even from a retrospective, you'd have much data about what's inside.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so they might have the original manufacturer and purchase date, something, right, but it would be hard to track. When he comes back, it would be interesting to hear what the type of testing that they were doing on broken ones, because that sounds like you could say you have an array where there's 1,000 panels, they were bought from the same company. You might only need to test one, right? And then figure out, is that array, which is coming out of service, going to need to be processed one way or another?
Right.
Does anyone know if there's some sort of type of national registry or something that they would have to like register their models and manufacturer numbers and somehow indicate whether or not it's hazardous constituents used to manufacture the panels?
I'm certainly not aware of any. I can check, but I'm not aware of any. One project that we have been talking about amongst solar manufacturers is, and I think we may have started this, but we're working with UL to incorporate a module type label into the UL standard, so that there would be a requirement under UL to label the module with the type of chemistry that it's made up of.
Just real quick, what is UL?
Underwriters Laboratory.
Yeah, underwriters.
And those are
Cannot
those
sell one.
On all your electronics and stuff.
Yeah, I would suspect it's impossible to sell one without that label.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought so, but I just wanted to be clear that that's what we were talking about here. Thank you.
All right. Guess we should move on to Dunbar. Wondering
Yeah.
how.
Let me share a few things. I can share, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, you can share your screen.
So on the sort of European front, at least this is a 3 years old, but they have a recycling plant for solar in Europe. I need to find out more about what they do with these choices for thin film or silicon or that sort of material, but I will circulate that to, I guess, Asia for distribution. So that's one thing. Now, if I just switch tabs, do I get And then does that now show this Nature Energy article?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if that had been circulated, but I thought this was a very nice treatment about the disassembly and components of more silicon module kinds of things. And so addressing features of the metallization, different components and the silicon wafers themselves, the aluminum frame, but the layers that are used to stick this all together, and we had talked about this last month, these are so rugged that it lasts for decades, and so this is the difficulty in taking it apart. So I don't think there's any hope of reusing the silicon wafers. I think they're going to have to just go get melted down and still need to be purified and everything. And then, so there's some data on recovery rates that are possible for different parts in these kinds of things. So this is something we should probably all take a look at, and I'll circulate that around. I have another thing. This one is on the topic of First Solar. Did that swap to this Virginia assessment?
It did not change.
Okay, so I'm going to have to unshare and share to a different one. Hold on. So, so this was a relatively recent report from Virginia Tech to First Solar about the cadmium telluride leaching. So I had last month, you might recall, I had thought that there was a system in place by First Solar to financially protect and recover their modules. I haven't found that story yet, but this is a report that covers some of the toxicity kinds of things that we're talking about. So again, I'll circulate that, but I think it confirms what we've been saying. This is a small fraction of all the modules. So might have to figure out if we can do an easy test and say, yep, that's one that's bad. Here's how it goes into this assembly line, and regular silicon modules might be processed a different way. So those are some things for our library, if you want to say it that way.
Right. That's a good way of putting it.
Dunbar, David, I understand that First Solar did initially try to reserve money as part of their sales process for recycling, but they stopped that. And I think that they now have like a fee for service type of approach to recycling. I want to say they made that change 2015-ish.
So it's very likely. I had just remembered an early story in that vein, and but I hadn't been tracking it as an effort for them. But I had thought, well, that's an eco way. If they were going to recover it themselves, that's one way of doing it. But you could be right that they're not doing it that same way now.
I don't believe so, but I could be, I could be right, I could be wrong, but I don't believe so.
All right. Anything else, Dunbar, you want to talk about?
No, I'll leave it at that.
All right, let's open the floor then. Anybody have questions, comments for Dunbar?
Just one quick question. Is every country using the same products?
I would think so. We're buying them all from China.
No, I understand that, but is there any, I guess, regulations that specify what can and what can't be used in certain?
I don't know of any that would be different for European market compared to America or China or other places. sometimes there might be preference for, for in America to have American made, or in Europe to have, or Germany to have German made, which was, possible. But the Chinese costs have come down so much that it's almost impossible to meet that. So mostly we benefit by getting low cost.
Okay, so here's a crazy follow-up question. How many Chinese companies actually produce this product?
Oh, I think there are many. And I think Lyle had some information last month, that was commenting about the, whether they're a grade A manufacturer, and they're maybe, gosh, something in my throat.
I remember a Bloomberg top tier or tier one.
Right,
Mhm.
the Bloomberg.
And that there was what, like 20 or so companies in that, or
Okay.
25.
okay, yeah. So I mean, it seemed like there were a good number of different companies in that group then.
I mean, we're a global manufacturer, and our goal is to manufacture one product, for a world market. So I would think with solar panels, aside from different voltages and things of that sort, where we have to change a power supply or an inverter, I would think the panel itself is the same. It's just the collecting specification, or the connection specifications maybe are different because they have different voltages, for example.
Right.
But we try to manufacture one panel for the world market to the extent feasible.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I guess we should move on to Jim, who was going to look into downstream markets, or actually I had already started looking into downstream markets.
You there, Jim? I can hear you. Can you guys hear Jim?
No, it looks like he's muted on the side.
Is this better? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that's better.
Yes.
Better?
That's better.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello to Sean and Christopher and David. Good to hear your voice. I hope all is well with you. David and I know each other from the world of e-waste, so we have some history, but obviously we know each other, which is a good thing. I just want to verify if maybe Aisha, you can give me a thumbs up that you can hear me still. Exactly, great. Okay, very good. So my assignment was identify and report on downstream markets. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to look into people that were processing these solar panels in the country. So I reached out to the largest processor of solar panels in the country, called Cascade Eco Minerals in Springfield, Missouri. They are a division of Delubic Glass. Delubic is one of the largest U.S. processors of window plate, container, and light industry glass. Been around in leaded glass, in and out of that market, doing a lot with glass. They have years and years of experience. And I had the pleasure of speaking with one of the executives for well over an hour, and who has a ton of experience in e-waste glass processing. And my goal was to review their operation as much as he would tell me, because a lot of this is proprietary. Review the panels, the makeup, the recyclability, contents, and how they process it. And again, also discuss the viability of a recycling business partnership, just to figure out, is there something that we can start here in the state and partner with somebody that is already doing the process and doing it well. And then I asked his suggestions to build a viable recycling program, what his thoughts were on that. The results were basically, Cascade has a proprietary process to handle solar panels. They actually remineralize the glass to create feedstock or cullet to manufacture new products. They break it down and separate the components into, they break it down and separate Cemented components that could be blended and resold. Examples of some of their markets that they're reselling to is road beading, paint fillers, fiberglass bottles, and of course color for new solar panel manufacturing. So, the answer is that the panels are recyclable, but of course it costs money to do so. There's no high value commodities to offset any recycling costs, like sometimes happens in e-waste, where that helps to offset the cost. So the panels do cost money to recycle, as I think Chris from PSEG can attest to. The goal, though, that I wanted to find out from Cascade is, they wouldn't tell me too much about their process, but he did reiterate to me numerous times about their zero landfill promise, which I think is important for everybody to understand, that everything that they bring in, everything they recycle, they have a no landfill promise. So that's always good. The market for recycling panels, I spoke with them about, about the lifespan, because this came up in the other meeting. Because as I look at this from a business perspective, e-waste is refreshing, constantly. There's new, computers, TVs, etc., that are always coming out. So I asked them about that, and also asked them about the need for return on investment. They brought up an interesting point about the panels, and I looked to David Thompson maybe to answer this or make a comment on this. He said a lot of the panels are 200 to 300 watt panels, and they're taking up square footage, and that the new panels are 585 watt panels, which is basically doubling the output. So he did reiterate to me that refreshing the panels or these arrays is happening. It's not just the damage, because when I looked at it, the life of these is 20 to 25 or 30 years. I kind of looked at it from a business perspective and said, boy, this is the loser thing. These things are never going to come out of service. So it was interesting for me to hear this other perspective, so I looked at David to hear his. He did also say to me the secondary market on these is shrinking due to the refresh. Manufacturers like Panasonic, making new and better systems, panels, and the price is getting driven down, through competition, also incentives to get new. So, and Cascade does some refurbishment, but not a lot. Okay. My last thing that I was curious about his feedback was suggestions for a program, and what kind of program would work in the state. Of course, we have an EPR law in the state, e-waste, and he said that's probably not going to work, and it's difficult for the manufacturers. He did say start with a land ban on the panels, which kind of goes along with that universal waste discussion that we had earlier, and stop the flow of material to the landfills. Once it does that, then obviously you've got to start to figure out ways to recycle and put something in place. These comments, and I agree with this, the EPR is going to be difficult with charging manufacturers, because there's so many manufacturers, it's just going to be almost impossible to implement. And he did fall back on California, and the e-waste discussion, which was an advanced recovery, which would be managed by the state. And I know, Karen, you had suggested that you do not want to go in that direction, but it may be the only way to build up a fund. Of course, the challenge will be to forecast, the recycling charges needed, as these come out in the future, but at least it's a starting point. So that is my research and my assignment.
Well, thank you. That was very informative, very succinctly put. So the feedback you got was an EPR. The challenge associated with the EPR for this is not the length of time so much that these panels last. It's more the sheer number of manufacturers that would need to be involved.
Yes.
Okay.
For context, I guess, ballpark, do we have an idea of how many manufacturers that would be? Just, thinking in my head sort of how that might compare to the number of manufacturers in the e-waste program, for example.
Sorry, if you could hear that question, that was directed to Jim.
If it was directed to Jim, he didn't hear you, Dan.
Sorry, I was asking Jim if ballpark about how many manufacturers would be involved if we knew that. I'm just trying to think, compared to the e-waste program where we have between about 45 and 65 manufacturers involved in a given year. I'm just curious what would be the number of manufacturers involved in a solar panel EPR?
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I remember in the last meeting when it was asked to Lau, like how many manufacturers are there, and when he went into discussion of the Bloomberg top tier manufacturers, he said there were at least 25 of the top tier, but that there were hundreds of different manufacturers, many different hundreds, he said, of manufacturers of the panels.
Because hundreds might be a bit of a struggle. So thank you.
And we do know that states with a e-waste land
Wait,
ban.
Karen,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Karen, Jim is elaborating. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Jim.
Go ahead,
I
Jim.
think that, yes, I think that David can attest to this. As these manufacturers disappear in the MRM program, all of a sudden the whole concept of orphans come in, where all the manufacturers then have to pick up the slack of these orphans that are going out, of these manufacturers that are going out. So with the solar program, I just feel that it's an undue burden to place on the manufacturers. Manufacturers can help in other ways, but I think from a financial standpoint, I think an advanced recovery fee is probably the best way to go.
So there's one difference I would think with other kinds of e-waste. The solar modules, at least when you think about silicon, if you look over time, the manufacturing's been very similar, right? And so if you look at computers, though, they're changing generations. It's not me. There's newer generations of electronic devices changing much more rapidly, I would think. So we have more of a constant product.
Hey, Jim, it's Chris with PSC&G. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Chris.
All right, I dialed in, so hopefully if the video drops, I can still stay connected to the phone. I apologize. I won't mention my provider internet. I looked at a couple of these organizations too. A couple things came up. A lot of them do tout, no landfill material, but I found a lot of the plastics end up going to a smelter in Canada. And I don't know if they had mentioned where the plastic waste would end up. And the other question I had, when we're, and Karen, you may know this better than me, but when we're dealing with a state regulated universal waste, when we ship out of state, right, does that mean those out-of-state facilities would need an EPA ID to be able to receive it as a haz waste? Because our jurisdiction of a universal waste would only remain within the state.
I don't know the answer to that question. Nick Beyer or Nick Nader, do you know?
I am not sure.
Well, depends on what kind of facility they are. I mean, what the state regs are.
Considering them a universal waste, they're considered a haz waste that fall into the universal waste category of haz waste, right? From a state regulated side. So therefore, if it's not federally regulated as a universal waste, then my understanding is that it would have to then be accepted by a haz. That facility would have to be approved to accept a haz waste. And I could be wrong. That's my understanding. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, universal waste facility authorized to receive hazardous waste. No, they need to have an EPA ID number.
Right.
But they are not a TSDF facility.
Right, because we have Class D facilities in the state that receive electronic waste, which is a New Jersey universal waste. They're not TSDs, they're just simply Class D permitted facilities.
I think the question is, if the solar panels were listed as universal waste in New Jersey, but not federally, if they were to go to an out-of-state facility, would it have to be a haz waste facility because solar panels are not federally considered universal waste?
That is a good question. I would hazard to say yes, but I could be wrong.
Maybe Nick, you could look into that?
Yeah, I'll ask around and see if I can get an answer. I believe the answer would be yes. It would need to be a haz facility, but I will see if I can get something more concrete than just what I think is right.
Yeah, I talked to somebody in Bob Gomez's shop.
Yep, we'll do.
Thanks.
And so what I found when I contacted a couple of these larger facilities too, and Jim, I did not talk to Cascade, but I talked to facilities such as Clean Light, and there's another one called Echo, and they're out, I believe, in Arizona area. Most of these facilities don't have the ability to accept hazardous waste, because we were even considering like the hazardous secondary material rule to try and get some ability to ship it in that fashion. But there's a lot of other things that come into play there that I don't even want to approach on this call. But so a lot of the facilities aren't even able to accept haz waste that currently do this type of recycling. So that's just another wrinkle. I don't know if it's all of them, but the few that I talked to were in that scenario. Okay.
This is David from Panasonic. Hi, Jim. Thank you for that update. Good to hear your voice again, too. It's been a long time.
All the ones that
We have been active in the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA, in establishing a network of recyclers. And the company that Jim just referred to, Cascade Echo Environmental, is one of those members. There's one more, I think Echo is in Carrollton, Texas, who also does some processing. And then there's a group called Dynamic Recycling in Wisconsin that does some processing. But all in all, I think the SEIA National Network consists of about 10 or so drop-off locations and 4 or 5 processors. I think the company that Jim was referring to is probably one of the more advanced ones in that if the company has a history of processing windshield glass, which is essentially 2 pieces of glass with a piece of plastic between it. Not that different than solar panels, and they do have a fairly unique technology for breaking these things apart. But I would be happy to circulate some information on the SEIA program. I don't think there is a real drop-off facility anywhere west of or east of Ohio right now. But we are, as a group of manufacturers, attempting to work with the recycling community by vetting them, feeding them production waste so that they can gain more experience, and then directing our distributors and installers to them when it makes sense.
So, Dave, are you saying that there are 2, 3, 4?
Hold on a second. I don't think she hear you. Wait a minute. You guys are talking at the same time. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was just saying that just one of the things that I did talk to Cascade about was becoming a drop-off location for them here in New Jersey in the Northeast, because we're pretty centrally located, obviously, in the New York metro area. And they were very open to that, as an alternative. And I love the fact that David's group is looking into, I guess, qualifying them, but let's just use that word, although it's a bad word sometimes, these facilities as being viable alternatives that actually do it. And David, I actually think in my discussion with Cascade, they talked about Dynamic, and Dynamic is a collection spot for them in Wisconsin. I think they are the sole collection spot in Wisconsin, and that they actually take all the panels from Dynamic and do their processing. And so, you know, having a facility like that as a resource, I think is really be good for the state.
That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, processing can mean many things in this business. You know, I guess if you remove the aluminum frames, you're processing in a way, right?
Yeah, right. You're right.
But the company Jim referred to, Cascade Echo Mineral, I think it is, CEM, they are emerging as a significant downstream processor for these materials. And again, I think they have a good way to break them apart. The panels contain a lot of glues and adhesives, and from what I've been told, those just do not mix very well with shredders, one of the more traditional e-waste processing devices.
So it looks like there's,
Sure.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
You want to repeat that, Jim? They didn't hear you.
Yeah, I was just saying that Cascade is very protective of their process. You know, as much as I'd love to visit their facility, I don't know if they're going to be ready soon, but it's always worth a try, and I'll keep you guys posted.
Okay.
So it sounds like there's 3 facilities doing some sort of downstream processing, one in Wisconsin, one in Missouri, and one in Texas.
Oh, no, there are more.
There are more?
Yeah, there's one in Phoenix, Arizona. There's one in Nevada, I think. Yeah, there are in other places. But if I could ask Jim or Dave, just out of curiosity, what are these facilities operating under? I mean, what regulations are they subject to in their respective states? Do you know? Do you happen to know?
I do not believe that any of them are permitted hazardous waste treatment facilities.
Okay, but are they? And they are not, presumably they're not universal waste facilities either, right? What are they?
They may be. I don't know off the top of my head. That would have to be researched.
Jim, do you know?
I don't know, but I can find out. I'm happy to ask.
Thank you.
I can say a couple that I've contacted and had some detailed conversations with. They are not. They do not believe they're accepting hazardous waste.
So all of these companies are doing this as on a fee basis. So every module costs X dollars or something like that.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the question for the market side of things too is, I think what's happening is that the cost of demanufacturing is exceeding the value of the product that they're able to get out of some of these older type panels. So it's actually just it's a negative on the financial side. There's a cost to it. And when we looked at just through some costs together from what we're paying on a haz waste side versus if we had the ability to recycle, the cost wasn't that different. It ended up shaking out pretty close to the same, but there is an invaluable cost of just the environmental benefit, not having this stuff end up in a landfill, of course. But the cost really didn't change so much.
Anybody else have any questions, comments, further discussion?
I was going to say, well, first of all, those companies, the company in Arizona is just called We Recycle Solar. The one in Nevada is called Recycle PV Solar. They they both claim that they do a great deal of solar panel processing, but I was just going to ask if it would be a good idea to ask the CEO of one of these companies to be a guest speaker in one of our future meetings. Do you think that would be beneficial, or anybody?
Yeah, I think that would be very enlightening.
That sounds great.
Well, I don't know, this guy in this company in Missouri, can we go?
Yeah, I'm happy to reach out to them, to Cascade, and ask them.
Great.
Okay.
Karen, I'm aware of one more company in Carrollton, Texas. I'll reach out to them and try to determine, the level of processing that they're engaged in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty basic question, right?
Yeah, I think
What
they're the
does
former.
processing mean? Exactly what are they doing?
Yeah, I think they're the former ECS International that was out in California, and it was closed down due to a failed leverage buyout or something of that sort. Maybe Jim would know better than me, but I think these two, the folks in Texas were affiliated with them.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the facility I spoke with mostly was Clean Light, LITES, in Ohio, I believe, was their facility where they manufactured solar panels. So I just looked them up. They're still in business, and they still list solar panel recycling on their website, amongst a number of other things.
Yeah, they are part of the SIA national program. Clean Lights is. Cascade Eco Mineral is. Dynamic is. The folks in Eco International, I think it is, are Eco Environmental. And I think ERI, a company in California, is going to join that network fairly soon. I will send some information on that program.
All right. All right, Stephanie, do you have some information to share with the group?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Stephanie Lee. I'm an associate professor in the chemistry department at NYU. And so I was looking at these newer technologies. I just thought I'd share this. I found it in a presentation from the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center that has some companies that do recycling. And you can see the amounts here. So some of them people I just mentioned. So I can share that later. So I was looking into, how this recycling actually happens. And like Dunbar said, the bottleneck in PV recycling is removing the polymer adhesive layers. So there's the encapsulant, which is ethylene vinyl acetate, and the backsheet, which is polyvinyl fluoride. So these two are holding the panel together, and they are very difficult to remove. So for solar, to my understanding, what they do is they try to shred the solar panel first, and then separate the glass from the silicon. It seems like, I'm guessing the removal of these adhesive layers happens through in this step using a solvent. So you can use organic solvents, which have their own, they're hazardous as well. And so then you have to treat the waste stream. So I think this is where it's being dissolved. I think the research into recycling silicon panels is trying to, instead of shredding everything and making a big mixture and then trying to separate, is if you can remove these polymer layers first, then you can just mechanically separate the pieces from each other a lot more simply. So the one that I kind of targeted in on was pyrolysis. So this is basically bringing the panels to high temperature in the absence of oxygen that avoids combustion, and you can degrade the polymer layers. So the EU is actually funding a pilot plant being built by a German company. And their plan is to recycle 50,000 solar modules a year. So I think this was funded in 2018, and they chose to go with the pyrolysis route. So they gasify the polymer layers and then burn them after. And so this can achieve up to 95% recycling of the material. So this is being studied in the laboratory too. You can see these are panels that were treated in the absence of oxygen at different temperatures. You really need to go to about 500 degrees Celsius to get full removal of the polymer adhesive in a way that is clean. So you can see this black residue that remains at lower temperatures. So that's really an area looking forward for, I think, advancement is, can we make these polymer layers out of something that is easier to remove? So there is a lot of US research into the pyrolytic process. So I can share this article later, but they detail some issues. You need a furnace that's large enough. It has to be done in a nitrogen environment. The back layer has fluorine, so there needs to be a special scrubber to remove the fluorine when you're doing this process. And so I don't know of any companies in the US that are doing this right now. But if you can lower the temperature, then that will make it a lot easier. And then after pyrolysis, then you can just manually detach the different components from each other. And then so I also saw this one other technique where this is a Japanese company, and I think they sell this equipment to disassemble solar panels. And the way that they address the polymer adhesive layer is to use a hot blade. So this blade can melt the layer to separate glass from other materials. And so this is commercially available technology. So it might be one route to go. And that's all I had.
Questions, comments for Stephanie?
That's interesting with the heated blade, slicing it off. That's cool.
Probably one of the easier ways.
I wonder how much one of those machines cost.
I can try to find out.
$1 million $1 billion.
It sure looks expensive.
Yes.
Right. I would hate to see you spend a lot of time, but I am really curious. Go ahead.
Yes, was there any information on how efficient this machine is?
This one, the rate that you can process solar panels, I don't know. I can look.
That would be important to know.
Yeah. And the cost.
Yeah. And like, how many of them are out there operating? Have governments bought them, or private industries bought them, or?
Yeah, I mean, if this is of interest, I can definitely do some more research into it. I was focusing more on the technology and the process, but I can look more for next time.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth investing a whole lot of time, but just for practicality sake, to see if this is like $1 gazillion or something that people actually can afford to invest in, you know, so. All right. And I think next on the agenda was Lyle, but I don't think he is here. So, Joe.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Good, good. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Ferranti. I'm an attorney. I've had a long association with the solid waste industry from every conceivable angle, I think. And I've represented companies in that context. I had the assignment to look at leases, which is a very stimulating thing for anybody in the legal industry, but not anyone else. So if you want to have, if you have insomnia, you can look at these leases. I could not find any of the Wild West leases that are used by actual companies engaged in installing these panels, but I did obtain, Aisha, I have a number of templates that I wasn't able to get to you, which I'm happy to give to you, and you can upload them into the room.
Okay.
These are products of the SEIA Association, the Solar Energy Industry Association, and they're templates that I assume could be used by contractors. Again, I don't know how many of them are actually used, but they're useful at least as a starting point to see the relationships between the contractors and the users. In the context basically of residential applications, I know from the BPU site that there are well over 100,000 residents in the state of New Jersey that already have solar panels on their either on their roofs or next to the buildings, what have you. So it's a significant number, and I think they fall down into two categories. I didn't do an analysis of how many power purchase agreements versus equipment leases are the dominant featured relationship, but I wanted to try to take a look at it and give it some thinking, give some thought to these leases in the context of what the commission's all about, which is obviously recycling and disposal of this equipment. And I think if you look at the leases, events within the lease that would trigger disposal prior to termination. Termination usually is a 20-year event. These leases are usually sold on again, using the template as a guide. They're sold for 20-year terms, either as a power purchase agreement relationship or as an equipment lease. They're 20 years. Some of the equipment leases suggest that it could be shorter, 10-year term. I assume in that case the price would be a lot higher. So my guess is that, as we talked about the last meeting, many of these leases will not be expired, or these agreements will not expire until 20 years after they've been put into effect. The kinds of events that typically would create a disposal event would be the usual things that you would expect in a lease, either a force majeure event or an uninsurable loss. Those things, bankruptcy by one of the parties, it depends on whether or not the supplier is able to retrieve the equipment and reuse it. But to me, the more interesting aspect would be something that was touched upon earlier, and that would be upgrading the components as new technology becomes available. And I'm not sure whether or not that leads to some type of public policy discussion regarding whether leases or power purchase agreements should incorporate some provision for upgrade. If the technology is rapidly evolving, particularly in terms of efficiencies, as I've read in some of the popular press, that the efficiencies are going from maybe 18%, 20% conversion to maybe 40%, even as high as 50%. If we're getting that kind of improvement in the technology, then upgrading existing installations might be an interesting way to improve the capacity that's available within the state. But that is not really an issue that is addressed in any of the leases that I reviewed. Again, these were templates from the SEIA Association, although one or two of them did suggest that upgrade would be available if you were in good standing in your contract and you wanted to obviously pay a little more to get the value. Again, it's going to be a cost-benefit evaluation by the user. But I think that's an area that might well benefit the state if we look into what impact it could have and whether or not we might want to express that in some public policy way. But the leases, as I say, I haven't seen any real actual leases. I'm operating from templates that the SIA group provided. I will upload those to you, Aisha, and then they can be, everyone who wants to look at them can look at them and get an idea of the relationship between contractor and user. But again, I don't know exactly how effective these leases have been in terms of getting the at least in terms of addressing the issues of disposal. I think they'll all terminate at a certain point, and most of them contain provisions that the provider will remove the equipment at its expense. But that, again, is a negotiable issue. I don't know how it's provided for in the real world. In the templates, it's the burden of the provider to remove and find a secondary use or dispose of them. That's about it. I will, as I say, it's a work in progress, but these are leases that look pretty standard, but again, I don't know how widespread they are actually used by those in the field.
So I was browsing earlier today on the BPU website looking for some information, and I came across a page that's dedicated to the ownership options for solar panels, and they're breaking down into 3 categories. There are third-party ship owner, third-party, the PPA agreement, and oh gosh, I forgot the other one. But based on the type
lease.
of
Conventional equipment lease. Yeah, the third-party ownership is
right.
the financing. That's the financing.
And depending on what type of agreement that the person has, depends on there's variances on it. If you have a PPA versus the third party, if there's damage to the panel as to who is responsible for it and how to transfer the ownership of that, because there's differences between each of these owner types. So that information is available on the BPU website. It lists it in table format and it explains it in very clean and simple terms and very detailed.
I didn't see that, Aisha, but are you saying that those are actual leases, or are they just are they based on some type of model?
No, they're just explaining the various options for a person who is wishing to have solar panels on their home, want to be an owner of a solar panel.
Right.
They said, what are your options to get them? How can you get them?
Right. Yeah, those options are explained on the SIA website too. So that's good. Obviously, someone who's investing in it should know what negotiating points are available to them. But again, what's actually out there, I haven't the foggiest idea of what the leases look like.
So I was going to comment on this. I think it's really interesting, this idea that a customer might decide that they want to put in newer panels because of degradation, or the newer ones might be better. And then that would trigger some kind of disposal. Obviously, the older ones would then be waste. And so thinking about how does that come to pass. But I wanted to spend a minute talking about some of the news reports about amazingly high efficiencies coming in the future. And so many of those kinds of popular press news are covering multi-junction solar, which might be built out of gallium arsenide family materials. And usually those require optical concentrators, mirrors, or or lenses or something like this. And so they're not drop-in replacement for an array that you might have on your house already. So if you were to be replacing with silicon, then there will be some improvement in efficiency, but it's not going to be those record. At least the reports that I've seen are often overselling the efficiency and not understanding the complexity of the systems that are involved in those.
From what I've seen, I think for crystalline silicon panels, lab testing of conversion efficiencies maybe 26%. Installations typically run 21%, 22%. And of course, the cadmium telluride models are a little bit lower than that. And where you see the higher efficiencies, as Dunbar was saying, there's either some special light concentrator or maybe some other design, but it's very common to see those. For example, NASA uses 44, 45% efficient solar panels, and those are pretty expensive. So I don't know that how quickly that comes. There's a new technology called Perscovite solar panel technology that people are talking about, which is supposedly going to be much cheaper to manufacture. But I'm not sure how quickly that's going to get off the drawing board. It's been on the drawing board for a long time, and into any real manufacturing process. But I mean, as Jim was saying, we are making larger panels, and there will be some upgrading, but I'm not sure. I mean, we'd have to look into to see how significant that is. I think that what Kyle last time said, it wasn't happening in New Jersey, but I do understand it's happening in some regions around the country.
Well, let me throw this out just as maybe a controversial perspective. In the air pollution field, the concept of best available control technology is pretty well accepted across the board, as it's a technology forcing concept. Does that have any applicability here?
You mean
I don't think from a regulatory standpoint it would, because I would think the markets would dictate that, right? So if there is a better panel available, but it's more expensive, it's like buying a car, right? You can get a better car for more money, but there would be the consumer's decision on how much they can afford to spend.
But it might have a sense for the recycling part. They're, seeing this picture that Stephanie found of slicing the module into the components. If that does it better, then maybe, I don't know, probably there's a cost aspect to it too. If it does it better, cheaper, then it is something where you would go with the best technology you can. I don't know how.
But I think what Joe is talking about, where you're talking about air permits and best available technology, there's a direct link there to, I think, exposure and human health that you probably just don't find so much in the recycling industry.
Right.
At least in terms of, reclamation efficiency. You might find it in terms of, the environmental controls in the facility. But
yeah, that's true. That's true. But I'm more interested in the notion of technology forcing. What kinds of, the market obviously is very important. It is the dominant feature in advancing technology, but yet there is a nudging that can take place through public policy directives. What form they take is another question. They can run the gamut from just pronouncements to formal regulatory things that have a period of implementation with them.
I think we're seeing that in the car market, where some states are banning the sale of gasoline-powered vehicles 2030, 2035, 2040, whatever that may be. they're certainly trying to force,
Well,
technological
you
change.
touched upon it earlier, I believe, when you said landfill banning would be one approach, right? I mean, that's certainly that certainly impacts on the costs of producing things. If the disposal becomes impossible, then you're pushing the pricing structure back up the line. So I think I just think from the standpoint of a healthy debate that it would be worthwhile looking at this notion of upgrading to force tech, because installed capacity is seems to be, it's growing, but it's a linear thing. This could accelerate it beyond that. Even if you have to do lenses on things of that nature and make it get it attractive and use the marketing skills of industry to promote it. It's something that, it affects it. Certainly, it affects the disposal of the equipment. If we press to upgrade, or certainly it'll affect the disposal if the new installations have these new features to them that would perhaps extend the life, make them more attractive. Anyway, that comes about spending time looking at leases and daydreaming in the process.
It's interesting. I saw an announcement from the Department of Energy for a new program from the Solar Energy Technologies Office for envisioning modules that could have a lifetime of 50 years. And so they're always pushing the envelope. But imagine that. That's almost a lifetime.
Yep. Which, I mean, I guess if we started running into that, then you do sort of, on the one hand, I think, there's an argument to be made in a lot of fields that if you're planning for circularity and all that, extending use and getting rid of planned obsolescence is usually a good thing. But if you get locked into something for, 20 years like we are currently, or 50 years, and then something better comes along, sort of how do you weigh that? I mean, if we were having this discussion and the lifespan of these panels was already 50 years, we wouldn't really have to worry too much for another 2 or 3 decades. But then in that period, if you're looking at what the efficiency gains might be, you might have even more impetus to dump these panels early. So.
Yeah.
All right. A few minutes for an open discussion, although I feel like that's kind of what we've been doing. So I guess from a standpoint of next steps, I feel that it would be appropriate for the commission to decide what kind of what the sections or chapters, whatever you want to call them, should be in the report. Just to give us an outline and a framework to stay within. And I don't know if the commission members feel like we are at that point yet, or whether we still have more general research to do before we break down into smaller subtopics that could translate to sections or chapters of the report. Because my goal is to have the commission, each member of the commission, take one of those topics and outline and draft a section or a chapter. That could be done individually, or that could be done in focus groups or subcommittees or whatever we want to call the smaller groups. I didn't give you much opportunity to think about this, so I would like everybody to give me what comes to mind at the moment, but then over the next week or so, email Aisha with ideas that should be included in the report, and those individuals who have an interest in tackling those topics. Obviously, we would need a background section.
So Karen David, I was very interested in the report from on recycling technology that Professor Lee gave. Is there any opportunity for the legislature to consider funding solar panel recycling technology, or is that just something that's kind of off the table?
So our charge from the legislation is that our report should make recommendations for statutory, regulatory, or private sector action. So I am not interpreting that as a mandate for the commission to say, okay, legislature, we would recommend that the government fund a project or technology. That's my interpretation. It's pretty clear that they think that this can be accomplished through legislation, regulation, or private sector action. But I also don't know that we are so hemmed in to the legislative direction that we couldn't make a recommendation like that. I just don't know if it would ever get legs.
Well, I guess my 2 cents would be that we should at least provide a basic overview of technology so that people can determine that this is something that's going to be more readily solvable, or if it is going to take some significant, additional research and development to truly, develop some sort of process whereby, the value of the materials that are contained in these products can be captured, and that can fund some system. I know that's probably a pipe dream, but that would certainly be my ideal.
So for me, I've really learned a lot even today in hearing about the conversations I think Jim had had with the recycler. And so the opportunity for us to maybe meet someone like that in our entire group seems like a really high priority.
Okay. Right, I think one of the, again, in the context of the final report, one of the sections should be current practices, who's doing what, where, under what regulatory authority, and success might not be the right word, but how successful are they? Are they making money? Is this a sustainable practice?
The constraints under the current practices.
Right.
The limitations of the current practices.
But I agree, Karen. I think the economics are going to play a significant role in this, right? Because, we're going to need to attract businesses to do this. And you're going to want to, the more local they are to us, too, in New Jersey, the more cost effective hopefully that process becomes, too. And then we have the dilemma of potentially shipping these materials out of state. But I think the economics are going to play a big part of it.
Right, and we have some legislation, food waste legislation, and it's been passed, I think, with the idea, okay, we will pass it and they will come, and this may be a similar type approach, that we don't have the infrastructure in place currently, but Arizona does, Texas does, these places that are currently operating processing facilities, but but I think you're right, Dunbar, without having a better understanding of what they're doing, how they're doing, and having them in to talk to us about those, well, we won't be able to assess the viability of, we will pass it and they will come. All right, any other ideas?
I think some of those other states have a lot of real estate. They have much larger arrays. They have significant storm events where things are damaged. New Jersey, we have a lot of, as you heard earlier from others, the homeowner installed arrays, and a lot of smaller arrays within New Jersey because of our size and development. I think it'll increase as we start to look at taking up existing warehouse structure space and roofs, and I think solar will become more attractive over time. But I think it'll take some time to get somebody, spark some interest in New Jersey for the manufacturer to come set up. And and face it, it's not cheap to work in New Jersey. No criticism of the DEP, but there's a lot of permitting in place. There's a lot of land use rules. And real estate's expensive. So I think we have to look at who is currently maybe doing electronic waste demanufacturing, because those are probably the likely companies that will then extend or expand their operations to include something like this, I have to imagine.
Yeah, okay. I think, well, I think for next meeting, we, well, we have to select a date, so Aisha will circulate a couple of Monday dates. Today is well, actually, maybe we can just settle on the date now like we did last time. So today is April 26th. If we're looking at the kind of end of May, can we pick May 24th as the next meeting tentative dates?
It's fine with me.
That's good with me.
Okay.
And Jim, can you reach out and see if the guest speaker could join us on May 24th?
I will definitely ask the question.
Thank you. Cascade?
And Karen, could you consider, or could we consider one other solar panel recycler, assuming that they do real processing? I'm thinking of the one in Carrollton, Texas.
Yeah, yes, that would be, yes, I do think having more than one would be advantageous and better inform the commission. If you could reach out to that individual?
I will.
Cascade. And I'm sorry, what's the name of the company in Texas, Dave?
I think it's Eco Environmental, but let me double, they're in Carrollton, Texas. I think they're the former, I don't know if this would mean, probably means something to Jim, but the former ECS e-waste processing facilities.
And I apologize, one of the commission members reached out to me and suggested another guest speaker, and I'm having trouble finding who that suggestion came from. Anybody, does that ring a bell with anybody? Lyle, maybe?
And Stephanie signed off about half an hour ago too, so.
Okay. No, it wasn't Lyle. Well, I will look into it and reach out to the individual. All right, so I guess for next meeting, some of us have had discussion with, follow-up. Stephanie's going to do some additional follow-up. We'll hear from Lyle. We'll have the guest speakers, hopefully. And then I guess I would like you all to come prepared with your ideas for an outline or the chapters or sections, whatever we want to call them, for the final report. just so we can start putting pen to paper and identifying our thoughts, as well as areas that need further research and investigation. So anybody have any other ideas or questions I'd like to discuss? All right, well, thank you. I continue to learn a lot from these meetings. I am probably one of the least informed individuals, but it's very enlightening, and to hear from people who are so experienced and knowledgeable. And I think if you, Dave, and Jim could confirm the guest speakers with Aisha, assuming that that is a go, then we can take it from there. All right, well, we have 5 minutes. So I just want to take 1 minute to, again, thank everybody for your time, your dedication, your time spent outside of this meeting, doing what's necessary to keep this project moving forward. All right, we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
See you
Bye-bye.
next month. Thank you.